Good evening and welcome to tonight's Fairfax County Democratic Committee, FCDC, National Affairs Forum entitled How Trump's Project 2025 Will Hurt You. I'm Sandra Clausen, the forum moderator and FCDC National Affairs Committee chair. This forum is being recorded. Our national affairs forums examine matters of national importance for the purpose of informing, engaging, and inspiring the kind of citizen action which is critical to save our democracy in this November's perilous election. I first want to recognize and thank those who contributed to organizing, co-sponsoring, and promoting this forum, with special appreciation to my outstanding National Affairs Committee colleagues. Although FCDC is hosting, this has become a statewide Democratic effort. We appreciate the nearly 50 Democratic committees and caucuses across the Commonwealth of Virginia who, clearly understanding the gravity and timeliness of this issue, have joined us as co-sponsors. They are the Democratic Black Caucus of Virginia, Democratic Asian Americans of Virginia, and the Democratic committees of Accomack County, Alexandria, Arlington County, Charlottesville, City of Fairfax, Clark County, Culpeper County, Essex, Richmond County, Fauquier County, Fifth Ward, Fredericksburg, Gloucester County, Goochland, Greene County, Halifax County, Hampton, Hanover, Enrico Dems, King William County, Lee County, Loudoun County, Madison County, Manassas and Manassas Park cities, Martinsville, Henry County, Mecklenburg County, Middlesex County, Kent County, Newport News Democratic City Committee, Nottoway County, Orange County, Virginia, Page County, Powhatan County, Prince Edward, Prince William County, Richmond City, Roanoke City, Lexington, Rockbridge County, and Buena Vista, Scott County, Shenandoah County, Southampton County, Spotsylvania County, Stafford County, Tazewell County, the Bedford, Virginia Beach, and Warren County. We also thank FCDC Executive Director Dominic Thompson and Greg Brandon for promotional and technology assistance, as well as the many organizations, including Progressive Democrats of America, who helped advocate for this forum. Finally, we offer attribution and gratitude for our graphic to staff cartoonist John Darkow of the Columbian Missourian. After my introduction, our program will proceed in three parts. In part one, our five nationally eminent experts will deliver presentations that examine key policy themes in Trump's Project 2025 and expose their prospective painful ramifications on American lives. After the five initial speakers have concluded their formal presentations, we'll proceed to part two, Q&A. I encourage forum attendees to write your questions for the speakers in the webinar Q&A box throughout their formal remarks. And please specify to which speaker or speakers you are directing your question. During Q&A, I'll ask my National Affairs Committee colleagues to read some of your and some of our committee prepared questions to the panelists. Finally, I hope you'll stay with us throughout, because I'm pleased to announce that we will be joined during our part three conclusion by a surprise speaker, a member of the Virginia Democratic Congressional Delegation, who will offer his perspective on the terrifying consequences of Trump's Project 2025. Okay, let's begin with an overview. Project 2025 is an over 900-page right-wing manifesto officially titled Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, produced under the auspices of the conservative think tank, Heritage Foundation, and supported by over 100 partner organizations to guide a potential second Trump White House to authoritarian rule. It lays out a sweeping policy playbook that seeks to transform the United States in ways that will fundamentally dismantle our democratic institutions. This is not just another policy agenda. Trump's Project 2025 lays out a plan that would erode the separation of powers, abolish checks and balances, turn schools into ideological battlegrounds rather than centers of learning, dictate Christian nationalism as a guiding force in governance, and pave the way to a fascist regime that strips away individual freedoms. Tonight, our esteemed panel will lay bare the existential threats on multiple fronts behind this fascist blueprint, drawing connections between its chilling proposals and the very real consequences they will have on your life, your family, and your future. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear will illuminate just how dark a future under Trump's Project 2025 could be. But as daunting as this agenda is, we are not powerless. The knowledge we gain here tonight is a crucial step toward defending our democracy and preventing this dystopian vision from becoming our reality. To begin the discussion, it is my privilege to introduce Ann Nelson, a prize-winning author and journalist who is joining us from a national tour speaking at screenings of the new documentary, Bad Faith, Christian Nationalism's Unholy War on Democracy, largely based on her book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. She is the recipient of the Livingston Award for International Journalism and a Guggenheim Fellowship for her book, Red Orchestra, the Berlin Underground, and the Circle of Friends Who Resisted Hitler. She has taught at Columbia University for over 20 years and currently serves as a research scholar at Columbia School for International and Public Affairs. She is a graduate of Yale University and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Ms. Nelson, we are eager to hear your remarks. Please begin.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you for having me. My attention was first drawn to Project 2025 last January, when I saw a short presentation about it, claiming that among the measures it suggested was the plan to eliminate the words reproductive health from all federal documents, legislation, and other areas. And that seemed shocking and unreasonable to me. And yet when I found Project 2025 and read the introduction, I saw that that was the case. They wanted to eliminate, in this Orwellian sense, entire words and concepts from our public life. So that made me decide to read it. And as 920 pages went by, I found a number of very concerning aspects that I will talk about. Now, before I do, I just want to mention the disclaimers that Donald Trump has made in recent times, saying he doesn't know what it's about, he doesn't have anything to do with it. And this is absolutely disingenuous. I would point you towards April 2022, when he took a 45-minute flight with Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, to a Heritage Foundation event. And there's a photograph of them together on the plane. And when Trump gave the keynote address at that event, he described the Heritage Foundation, which oversaw the production of Project 2025, as their quote, and this is a direct quote, "They're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do." So that was certainly a very definite indicator. And if that's not enough, then you can look at Kevin Roberts' forthcoming book called Dawn's Early Light. The original title was Burning Down Washington to Save America, with a match on the cover. And you can find images of that online. And the introduction is by J.D. Vance. So you have a very close relationship between the Trump-Vance campaign and this project. Now, this project goes back 40 years. It has been a reiteration every 4 years, presented to Republican candidates with varying success. Some Republican candidates have largely disregarded it. Others have passed some measures. They felt they had some success with Reagan, but they had nothing close to the success with their suggestions that they had with the Trump administration elected in 2016. And one thing that you can tell in looking at this document now is that a lot of the organizations that really got behind Trump in 2016 are listed as supporting groups for the project. And it's no coincidence that a very large percentage of them receive funding from the Koch network. Others receive funding from Leonard Leo and his Marble Trust. There's considerable overlap between them. A number of them are also core organizations of the Council for National Policy, the subject of my book, which coordinates the actions of major donors, strategists, and people who do the work on the ground. So it's very much of a project that has been in the works for a long time and has been knitted into the Trump operation, certainly from before his election in 2016. Now, in terms of what we need to worry about in it, I think that one thing that you have to look at is, the area that first draw my attention to it. When you say eliminate the term reproductive health, this is just a sweeping statement about women and women's role in society. Women, let's put aside the abortion debate for the moment. This also goes into basic care, basic services provided by Planned Parenthood, all kinds of areas that women would be involved with. It also slashes Medicare and Medicaid. It also goes into areas that affect the health and safety of children. So one of the items on it is that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, should not be allowed to recommend the masking and vaccination of children in school. So if you have the Center for Disease Control not allowed to recommend vaccination for school children, you have this really terrible complicity with the anti-vaxxing movement that is doing tremendous harm in our country right now. People may not be aware that we're amidst several new outbreaks of not just measles, which can be fatal for something like 2 to 3%, or 2 to 3% children out of every 1,000, but also whooping cough, which is a disease which should have been eliminated in the 1940s when the vaccine was developed. And instead, through these anti-vaxxing measures, you have a resurgence of whooping cough in a number of states, and it is indeed fatal, especially to infants and very young children. So you have this complicity. What is this about? It ties into this desire to eliminate people's trust in the federal government, and also sow distrust in the bodies of knowledge represented by doctors, by professors, by public school teachers, by scientists, and wholesale attacks on people who have served the public so nobly, such as Anthony Fauci and Dr. Peter Hotez in Houston, who saved countless lives through their work on vaccinations. So this is really a very, very serious set of measures that they discuss. Along the way, they also want to eliminate Head Start. This is something that they've discussed for a long time. And if you had a Republican administration, I think that they might actually find a way to do it. Another area that is of concern is the area of discrimination. So under the language that they propose, we could go back to the bad old days where a person could be fired from their job simply based on being gay, LGBTQ, right? So many of us are old enough to remember the days when that was the case. And I think that it would come as quite a shock to a lot of people. There's language in it that is very poorly thought out, and you wonder how they would actually implement it. One is that every child has the right to be raised by the biological male and female who conceived them. So I don't know whether they actually mean that they would eliminate adoption and foster care, but that's what it says. That really shows the mediocrity of the arguments, but that has not stopped many of them from being implemented in the states where they've gained a foothold. I will talk a bit about the areas of environment and food safety. It would cut out federal food safety examinations and programs in the Department of Agriculture and revert those inspections to the states. Given the sloppy behavior of some of the states, including my home state of Oklahoma, this could present a real physical risk to to millions of American consumers. Another area of risk is dismantling the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which gives citizens warnings when there are hurricanes, floods, hailstorms, and tornadoes on the way. Apparently, they want to dismantle it and perhaps privatize it so that everybody would have to pay for the privilege of hearing that there's a tornado coming down on their town. I would like to see how that would work. A lot of this would be executed through the elimination of up to 40,000 positions in the federal government. These are qualified government workers, many of whom have a highly developed skill set in their area. You are talking about scientists, administrators, economists, and there's currently an activity that's fully underway to replace them with MAGA militants. So the Heritage Foundation is actively recruiting and training people pretty much off the streets, claiming that they will replace these civil servants with their followers really quite early on in the administration. I'd like to just close by talking about some of the environmental areas, which I hope others will follow up on as well. This document is an argument for allowing the fossil fuels industries and the extractive industries to run rampant across our environment, across our planet, giving them free rein to do whatever they want, cutting back or eliminating many projects that are looking for ways to find alternative energy and preserve the environment. It calls for withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords. It's so extreme, they even want to remove the energy ratings from refrigerators in case somebody might not burn as much fuel as possible with every single appliance in their household. So you see the influence of the Koch network in the energy areas, but you also see them in other areas. I think as an overview, what you're looking at is an approach that would allow these giant corporations, which are doing so much environmental damage, to have as much free rein as possible, maximize their profits at the expense of the polity, and use the so-called culture wars of extremist religious forces in terms of cutting back on rights of women, LGBTQ people, minorities, and immigrants as a way of winning votes. But it is my strong belief that every citizen will suffer the effects in the end, unless they're one of the club of Koch and CNP-based plutocrats.
Thank you, Anne. I want to, hopefully there's going to be another opportunity to hear more from you in the Q&A segment. Audience members, I'm sure you'll understand when I tell you that Anne is in Georgia now, and she's going to have to leave us for a little while to talk with voters in that battleground state, but she's going to return to us later in the forum. Thanks again. And it is now my good fortune to introduce Dean Baker, senior economist and co-founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Mr. Baker's areas of research include housing and macroeconomics. He is the author of several books, including Rigged: How Globalization and the Rules of the Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. He has also worked as a consultant for the World Bank, the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress, and the OECD's Trade Union Advisory Council. His analyses have appeared in many publications, including the Atlantic Monthly, the Washington Post, the London Financial Times, and the New York Daily News. He received his BA from Swarthmore College and his PhD in economics from the University of Michigan. Please proceed, Mr. Baker.
Thanks, Sandra. So I have a PowerPoint, which I'll see if I could correctly get up here. How is that doing? Okay. There we go. Set up slideshow. Okay, there we go. I knew I could do it. All right, so I'm going to talk about Project 25, but also about Trump's policy, because I, of course, did my homework and read what it had to say about economic issues. And I realized that a lot of this is kind of wishful thinking by a right-wing think tank, which is, of course, what Heritage is. So many of the policies they proposed are mutually exclusive. And many of them are things clearly Trump will not do. So I'll just mention my favorite. There was one there that we should return to the gold standard. I'll assure you, Donald Trump will not return to the gold standard. He has a lot of crazy things he wants to do. He's not going to return to the gold standard, for better or worse. What he might end up doing could be worse. But in any case, he's not going to do that. So the main themes I want to hit on is one, taxes, which could be described simply. Most people will pay more unless you're rich. Secondly, story on inflation, imports, mass deportations, and inflation more generally. One of the things I find striking, and I blame both the media reporting, but also I think the Harris-Walz campaign could be better on this. The main complaint against the Biden-Harris administration, of course, has been the inflation that we saw 21-22 to the supply chain crisis. Basically, Trump wants to reproduce that. So that should be a big negative for him. But, unfortunately, or better or worse, it hasn't been. The last point is to talk a little bit about labor in a second term. Most of us know that the Biden administration has probably been the most labor-friendly administration ever. That is going to be reversed in a very big way in a Trump administration. Okay, so to start out, taxes going up. He's proposing 10 to 20% tax on all imports. Now, he's actually, depending on the day of the week, he was actually at something, I forget where it was, yesterday or the day before. He said, well, maybe 500%, maybe 1,000%. It's kind of incredible to me. One thing that seems to go beyond people, or much of the discussion, a tariff is a tax. I mean, that isn't a controversial point. I mean, it's definitional. He's running around saying he wants to have a tax of 10 to 20%. Again, as I said, yesterday he was saying 500, who knows, and 60% on all imports from China. These are very, very, very big tax increases. And I'm old enough, I think we're probably all old enough to remember when it used to be absolute gospel for Republicans. You didn't talk about tax increases. That was off limits. These are tax increases. There's not any dispute about that. So if you're talking about a 20% tax on all imports, that's somewhere on the face of that, you're starting around 500 billion a year. I mean, this is just enormous. You take that over a 10-year time frame, that's around $600 billion. I mean, it's just an incredible hit. And the thing about this is that if you impose these taxes, it overwhelmingly hits moderate middle income people, because these are people, one, they spend much of their income. If you're Elon Musk, I don't know what his income is these days, but I'm sure he's not spending all of it. If you're a typical worker, a teacher, a truck driver, what you might think of as an ordinary worker, they're spending close to all their income. So that's what's subject to tax. The other thing is that if you're taxing goods, now to be clear, goods appear in everything. If we go to a restaurant, if we get services, there's still goods that go into that. So it's not as though you somehow evade it if you're getting services. But the fact of the matter is the rich will disproportionately spend on services. And the very rich, of course, are going to be spending on things, much of it out of the country. They'll take trips to the Caribbean, wherever it might be. So a tax, his tariffs are incredibly regressive, overwhelmingly hits low and middle income people. And again, I wish that people were more clear when he says, the other day he said, tariffs are the most beautiful word in the English language. And I posted that on Twitter, that I never thought I'd hear a Republican saying that taxes are the most, and people saying, he didn't say taxes. He did say taxes. I mean, that's what it is. This isn't a game. It's a tax on imports. So that really has to be front and center when we talk about his economic policy. Secondly, I'm just going to mention something that isn't 225. As I say, Trump's running off saying whatever. I take that more seriously in terms of what he's likely to do than what's in 225, because they're not going to constrain him. Social Security is tax-free. Well, I have friends who's going, well, that's a really progressive thing. I go, no, it is not. It's not. Somewhere around a third of the beneficiaries, I should know the exact number, but somewhere around a third of beneficiaries, they're paying zero tax. Their income, Social Security, they're paying basically zero tax. Another third, they're paying a little. You're not going to give them any big favors with this. But when you get to the high-end earners, let's say someone all their life, they were at the very top. Currently, it's 162,000 thereabout, where you have the cap. So you're a high-end earner your whole life. You could easily be getting 50, 60,000 a year in Social Security. You get that tax-free. That could be 20,000 a year for people in the 40% bracket. So this is real money. It's an incredibly regressive tax cut. It's not progressive as some people are saying. And again, for most beneficiaries, it's little or nothing. Tips will be tax-free. Again, for most people who are working in tip areas, obviously mostly table servers, that's the most common. Also obviously housekeepers. You have others that get some money through tips, but mostly it's table servers. They're barely paying any income tax as it stands now, and some of them actually could be hurt because you have negative. It could be a net negative with your income tax credits. You have a lot of people, disproportionately, we're talking about women, mothers, that are working part-time, part-year. If they earn less money, they'll get less money from the EITC. And that's, to my view at least, that's a really bad thing. I should also point out it's an invitation to gaming. So one of the things, again, across the political spectrum among economists, you want to have the tax code be as simple as possible. So if you say someone's earning $30,000 a year as working as a retail clerk, you want them to pay the same taxes as someone who gets $30,000 a year, $10,000 of it through tips. I mean, I can't figure out an argument how you'd argue differently. So one is kind of an ethical issue, but perhaps more importantly, you say if you get money as a tip, it's not taxable. Well, guess what? We're going to have a lot of investment bankers that get a lot of their money through tips. And, if you think that's a joke, these people know how to game the system. And remember, one of their basic principles is they're going to get rid of a lot of the people at the IRS who are there to enforce the tax code. So if you tell an investment banker that, hey, you want to take $500,000 a year tax-free, just call the tip, no one's going to check. Well, they're going to do that. So this is like crazy, but that's how he's proposing. And I should say, I'm not a fan of Harris proposing being tax-free either, but she said strictly the hospitality industry and capping it at 70,000. So that at least would limit the extent of the gaming. He also wants to extend the 2017 tax cuts. That's, again, I don't have to go through that in great detail. I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but it's basically a very big tax break for high-income taxpayers. So again, it's increasing taxes on middle-income people, moderate-income people, very big gains for high-income taxpayers. I also should add, I didn't put this in the list, but he also said he wanted to lower the tax rate, the corporate tax rate, from 20% to 15%. He already lowered it in the 217 tax cut from 35 to 21. So he wants to lower that further. So again, obviously it disproportionately goes to high-end people. And the Institute for Tax and Economic Policy, they estimated to raise taxes for the middle quintile by about $1,500 a year. It lowers it to the top 1% by $36,000. So this is a very big tax hit for middle income people and a very, very big tax cut for the very wealthy. Okay, second thing I'll mention, the mass deportations. This is, again, it's kind of mind-boggling. So you go, how are you going to do this? And I've been complaining that, how come there isn't more coverage? I mean, he says mass deportation everywhere. So, people say he's not really serious. Who knows? But he sure has it front and center everywhere. So, again, I was saying the bulk of the import tax would be passed on higher prices. If you do mass deportations, you can get rid of close to 40%. We don't have good numbers. I've seen estimates over 50% of our agricultural labor force. Also, you get rid of a large portion of the workers in food processing, construction, home health care. This is going to be a really big hit for inflation. I mean, just think of that. Let's focus on the farm workers for a moment. If you get rid of half or 40% of our farm labor force, who's going to be picking our crops? There was a guy at a Univision town hall for Trump yesterday, and he asked him that question, and Trump basically gave him nonsense. I'm great for farmers. I mean, it's literally incoherent, but that's a real question. And if you're talking about mass deportation, that's, we're going to have a real problem growing our food and getting it to the to people in the grocery stores. The third thing on the inflation issue, again, I've had plenty of criticisms of the Fed, but it does act as a check on inflation. And Jerome Powell, who actually was a Trump appointee, he raised rates a lot, and it did help to bring inflation under control. It's a more complicated story that I won't go into, but there's no doubt it did help to bring inflation under control. Trump has been very open that he does not think the Fed should be independent. And I think it's a safe bet that if he's unhappy with what the Fed's doing, if we had a Jerome Powell or whoever is his successor raising interest rates, and Trump said, no, I don't want that to happen, they wouldn't be able to do it. So I think we're likely to have really, really serious problems with inflation in the Trump administration. Okay, the last point, labor in the second Trump administration. This is, again, I think, hugely underappreciated. The National Labor Relations Board has been probably the most labor relations, I'll just say in my lifetime. I'd have to go back to see, I wasn't around when it was set up in the 30s, but they take the labor law seriously, and that matters because, those who are familiar with the issue, as it has ordinarily been interpreted, companies will routinely violate the law. They'll fire workers involved in organizing, or they're doing other things. And the consequence is they tell them not to do it again. I'm serious. That's the consequence. They say, don't do it again. They go, okay, we won't do it again. Then they do it again. They say, don't do it again. Well, they actually said, they took the step where they said, okay, you fire someone in the course of organizing or do other things to disrupt an organizing campaign. Guess what? You have a union. Now you have to negotiate with them. That's a very, very different National Labor Relations Board. That will not be the case under Trump. You'll have very pro-business people who will be perfectly fine, basically ignoring the labor law. The second point, this again didn't get the attention it deserves. We have around 20% of workers in the country now have non-compete agreements in their contracts. And if people aren't familiar with this, this is the idea that you can't quit your job and work for a competitor. Now, original idea, you could argue whether it's justified or not, is if you're a corporate lawyer and you decide, you have your list of clients and you're going to go off and, form your own firm. Well, can you do that? So they're constrained from doing that. There's a story there. You can argue whether it's good or bad policy. But you got to the point where people working in sandwich shops had to sign non-compete. I mean, this is close to nuts, 20% of the workforce. So the FTC basically is banning it except in extraordinary situations. That's being contested in court. But Trump's FTC is not going to be banning non-compete agreements. Overtime protections. Trump says he hates overtime. He doesn't pay it. He said that literally. So I'm not putting words in his mouth. He doesn't pay overtime. Well, we haven't kept up. Our overtime standards haven't kept up with inflation, with wage growth. The Biden administration has raised that. I should know the exact number, but somewhere around 50,000. So it's saying, if you were in less than 50,000 a year, you qualify for overtime. And just to be clear, this isn't just people are paid by the hour. You have a lot of people that are salaried workers. Say it could be an assistant manager at a fast food place. They might be a salaried person, but they haven't worked more than 50 hours a week. This regulation says that they have to get paid overtime. That's going to go out the door with Trump. The last point, workplace safety regulations. Again, Trump has made it very clear. He's got Elon Musk at his side yelling in his ear. Same thing. Obviously, we don't want the government interfering. If we have unsafe workplaces, that's our problem. Well, it's obviously the workers' problems. But again, these are the sorts of things we should expect from the second Trump administration. So that's the basic story. I probably ran a little over, but again, it's a pretty bad picture in my view. And unfortunately, if I went on longer, it would get worse. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dina, and hopefully you will go on longer during Q&A. Thanks so much. Now moving on, with admiration, I introduce our next speaker. Alex Lawson is the Executive Director of Social Security Works, the convening member of the Strengthen Social Security Coalition, a coalition made up of over 340 national and state organizations representing over 50 million Americans. Mr. Lawson has appeared on numerous TV and radio outlets and is a frequent guest covering Social Security and Medicare issues on the Thom Hartmann program, one of the top progressive radio shows in the country. He has a BA from St. John's College and an MPP from the George Washington University, and he is on Twitter at ALaw202. Please welcome Mr. Lawson. Mr. Lawson, over to you.
Thanks, Sandra. And it's a real pleasure to be here with such a great panel, speaking with everybody. I have a lot to add, but a lot of what is in there has already been, talked about. So I kind of want to zoom back a little bit and say, what is Project 2025? And let's just make it really clear. This is a unified document. If you look at the signers, it's just page after page after page of signers who've signed their name to this document. They represent every corner and crevice of the right-wing infrastructure. You have neo-Confederates on there, verging into just straightforward white nationalists, aligned with, you know, the sort of just pro-business Republicans who just want to extract as much money as possible. They're signing the same document. You have, you know, the people who waged a decades-long campaign to overturn Roe v. Wade and take away a woman's right to have control over her own healthcare. They've signed on. They're all on this document. So I look at it a little less sanguine than Dean in saying, you know, well, there's things in there that, you know, he's never going to do. That's sort of irrelevant to what the document is, which is actually a manifesto that says we, the united right wing, that are going to do the work if Donald Trump is elected, have decided that instead of fighting each other, we're going to work together to put in place our vision for America. And then they write their vision down. But the important thing is actually that they're all saying they're going to do it together. They're going to all work together to do it. And what the it is exactly the same as overturning Roe v. Wade, right? They know what they want to do, and they systematically implemented this. Each Supreme Court justice that, you know, went to the meetings with the right-wing organizations and promised them, if I get on the court, I will overturn R v. Wade. Part of the strategy is then go lie to the American people. When you go in front of the Senate for a confirmation hearing, look earnestly at the senators and say, I definitely won't overturn Roe v. Wade. And people fall for it. The media definitely falls for it. The media is like, oh, well, they said on TV they weren't going to do it. And you're like, look at the documents. Look at what they say when they're talking to each other. That's what they want to do. And that's what Project 2025 is. It's the document of what they want to do, the America that they will build. And Donald Trump is actually irrelevant to it as a person, because he's out there dancing on stage, talking about this or that. He doesn't understand half of the things that he talks about. And he also understands really well, or the most important thing is he understands really well that that doesn't matter, because he's not going to be the one who's doing all of it. The people in Project 2025, the signatories, I invite everyone to look at their names. That's who's going to be implementing all of it. They need Donald Trump sitting in the chair so that they can put their agenda in place. Donald Trump wants to sit in the chair because he doesn't want to sit in jail or whatever motivates him. He just wants to sit in the chair. The Project 2025 authors want him in that chair so that they can overthrow the American system of checks and balances, which has held back their right-wing vision for decades and decades and decades. It's the same players. We know who they are. We know what they want. We know what the Koch brothers want. We know what the anti-choice zealots want. We know what their objectives are. The thing that Project 2025 writes down is how they would do it. So I think it's really important. The first thing they do is they fire 55,000. It was a previous panelist said 40,000, but I think my notes are, if you count them up, it's 55,000 civil servants. They fire them. So it guts the administrative state. The purpose of that is to eliminate any expertise, any professional who might say, hey, if you do this, if you put a giant tax on all of these goods, you're going to crater the American economy. Well, that professional is fired. And in their place, as was noted, is a person who they've just recruited, and the only criteria that they have is will you sign this oath that you will follow the MAGA Project 2025 blueprint no matter what? And they say yes. You can go online, and I invite everyone, always check everyone's work, but go online. You can watch the videos of the Heritage Foundation training of these MAGA, I don't know, I don't have a good word for what they'll be, but their whole purpose is to just destroy the administrative state. So you gut the professionals, take all the people who actually know about things out, and replace them with ideological people whose only, the only reason that they get that position is because they say we will follow the orders of the authors of Project 2025, no matter what. That's the important thing. Project 2025 destroys the system of checks and balances. And they also say it really clearly. And I think people should read. You don't even have to read all 900 some pages. You sort of read in the introduction and part where they lay it out. They say, we're going to do things that are illegal. We know there are things that we're doing that are quote unquote illegal. But we have also taken over the courts. So we think the courts won't challenge what we do, these illegal acts of pulling all of the power into the White House, into the executive branch, so that one person is able to do whatever they want with no checks and balances. That's the fundamental thing that Project 2025 lays out that I hope, excuse me, everyone takes away from this. What it is a document that lays out their brazen plan to overturn the American system of checks and balances that has served this nation since its birth, to ensure that we don't have a king, an authoritarian in the White House who can do whatever they want. That's what Project 2025 is. So I want to really spend most of my time just hammering that point home. What Project 2025 does is eliminates checks and balances so that all decisions are made from the executive, from the White House, from the chair that Donald Trump sits in. It's not going to come from his brain because he doesn't care. He's going to go to the authors and say, what do I do? So now I'll get to what I was invited to specifically talk about, which is, let's take Medicare. I don't need to have read Project 2025 to say what it is they want to do with Medicare, because it's the same thing they've always wanted to do, privatize it. I did read Project 2025, all of it, because it's terrifying, but also really stupid to have written it all down, because these are deeply unpopular policies. Here's what Project 2025 does. It overturns, it gets rid of Medicare drug price negotiation. It raises people's drug prices, right? It gets rid of the $2,000 out-of-pocket cap on prescription drugs that people on Medicare will get next year, so that nobody is going to be paying more than $2,000 out of their pocket for prescription drugs. That's what's happening right now. Project 2025, what Trump will do, get rid of that, right? So raise your drug prices, make sure that there's no limit to what the pharmaceutical corporations will make you pay. That's off the bat. Get rid of the Inflation Reduction Act. And on healthcare, that means letting pharma charge whatever they want and making sure that people have to pay that. Privatizing Medicare is the long held goal of the health insurance corporations in this country. Right? There's a report released today, that they looked into United Health Group, Humana, the CVS, the other big providers of so-called Medicare Advantage, which is just corporate insurance that they've privatized parts of Medicare. And they're denying 1/4 of claims. Sometimes it's Humana's, I think, was 16 times higher than the average. right? So these corporations make their money by denying care. They can't make money by providing care. What traditional Medicare does is if you get sick, you get the care that you need, and Medicare pays for that. It's called fee for service. The insurance companies hate that because they know that they make money by denying care, not by providing care. So most of what the report went into today, most of the denials, or where they're very concentrated, are in situations that are post-acute rehab situations. And it sounds sort of like, what is that? Well, I'll tell you what that is. Oftentimes, if a person has a stroke, if their life is saved in the acute moment, so in the emergency moment, that's one thing. But for them to actually be able to live, they need to have a correct amount of rehab. And if that is cut short, their lives are cut short. That's the denials that the insurers have astronomically higher, and they continue to rise. It's growing at an alarming rate, and what the report also calls out is the use of AI or just algorithmic denials. So I want you to really think about why. Why do they deny like this specific thing? Because they want people who cost money to die. That's what it is. The denials that insurance companies focus on are on the care that is needed the most. So if a person has cancer or MS, or they have a stroke, they're going to be very costly to an insurer. So the insurer delays and denies the care to them, hoping that they die, because then they don't have to pay for anything more. That's literally the business model. So what Project 2025 does is says, we're going to take the already shrinking traditional Medicare. Privatized Medicare makes up about 54% at this point. So they're going to take the already shrinking part and just eliminate that as fast as possible, so that the only thing that seniors have in Medicare is United Health, CVS, Humana, and these other corporate insurers that literally just today, a Senate report came out and said, these insurers will kill you for profit. So what Project 2025 does is says, we want to put those guys in charge of all healthcare. This is the long-held dream. It's just privatizing Medicare and making sure that the corporate insurers can profit off of everyone's healthcare. By which I mean not providing healthcare, denying healthcare. That's how you profit off of healthcare, not by not providing it. So what does Project 2025 say for Social Security and retirement security? So in this one, you have to sort of be able to, again, understand that what Project 2025 is just a litany. It's the long-held dreams of the right wing. So what is the long-held dream of the right wing?
Alex, about 2 minutes, okay?
Yep, is to destroy Social Security. And what that means is they say we're going to have a balanced budget, which again sounds, a lot of people who don't know what the policies are might nod along and say that sounds fine. It's not fine. It would be maybe fine if what they meant was we're going to tax rich people and tax cheats who aren't paying anything. And in that way, we're going to bring in more money. But even then, it's stupid policy. But very importantly, they don't mean that. They not only are not going to raise taxes, they give tax cuts to the wealthiest people. So when they say balanced budget and they also have tax handouts, what they mean is they're going to slash our Social Security benefits. They're going to take it out of our Social Security benefits. And you don't have to believe me. You can look what Donald Trump is actually, this is where we are. He says he's going to put Elon Musk in charge of a commission that's going to find $3 trillion in savings from doing what he did to Twitter to the United States of America. But that $3 trillion number is cuts to our earned benefits. So what Project 2025 does is takes the guardrails off, eliminates the checks and balances, which has held back this right-wing hellscape that they want to push us into. We know what we're fighting against because it's what they've been trying to do for decades. And what Project 2025 does is says, we're going to just do it. We're going to fire everybody, replace them with people who only listen to us. We're going to do illegal things, but we're going to also know that we took over the courts, so the courts aren't going to challenge us. And if this sounds terrifying, it is terrifying. And every page of Project 2025 is more terrifying than you can even dream up when you get into the provisions of what they want to do. So thanks a lot, Sandra.
Wow. Thank you, Alex. Very much appreciated. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Matt DUS is Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy. Previously, he was Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. Mr. DUS's writing has appeared in numerous publications and journals, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Foreign Policy, Politico, and the American Prospect. He appears regularly as a commentator on radio and television. He received an MA in Middle Eastern Studies from the University of Washington's Jackson School of International Studies and a BA in Political Science from the University of Washington. Mr. DUS, please share your insights.
Thanks very much, Sandra, and thank you for inviting me to speak to everyone tonight, and I really appreciate being part of this. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say is going to tee off with what Alex just said. I mean, I think a huge part of what Project 2025 proposes is removing the checks that exist on presidential authority, removing those checks and balances that are really key to, I think, Americans' understanding of how our government is supposed to work. But when we talk about foreign policy is an area where a president has already pretty enormous authority to design and execute the foreign policy. The Constitution empowers the executive branch with a lot of leeway to design and execute a vision of foreign policy. Although obviously the Congress has its own authorities of oversight, as the body that controls the budget, the purse, the power of the purse, as they say. But Project 2025 would remove the few checks that really exist on presidential authority on foreign policy. And I think it's worth thinking about as reckless as Trump's first term was, as close as we really did come to war with North Korea, with Iran. And we did come very close to war in several instances. Project 2025 proposes to remove the brakes that I think helped us avoid real catastrophe in those and other cases. So I'm just going to run down a few of the concerns. First, Project 2025 proposes gutting agencies, protecting Americans against foreign threats. It advocates for staffing the National Security Council, which is, the foreign policy council in the White House that advises the president on a range of foreign policy issues and collects information and recommendations from all the different departments and bureaus. It would staff the NSC with individuals whose primary qualification is political loyalty and fealty. And again, this is, I think, reflects what we've heard from previous speakers. Now, Project 2025 on Inauguration Day recommends reassigning, quote, non-essential NSC staff to their home agencies, including military officers, intel analysts, and diplomats, leaving the White House unprepared to fully engage with the Departments of Defense, State, Homeland Security, and others, as well as the intelligence community. Project 2025 recommends recalling career foreign service ambassadors serving in the nation's most consequential postings if they have not demonstrated significant loyalty to the incoming president. We saw the first time during the first Trump administration that the lack of experience or knowledge of many of Trump's political ambassador appointees brought embarrassing and at times costly consequences. We already know that this practice of appointing political funders and flunkies to sensitive foreign policy positions makes the United States an outlier in the developed world. But further entrenching this practice, I think, would be a significant blow to our international relations and to our national security. Next, Project 2025 would politicize the military chain of command and U.S. intelligence agencies. It recommends the White House review all senior military general officer and flag officer promotions to ensure that they align with domestic political priorities, and proposes replacing career intelligence officers at the CIA with new hires more committed to the president's agenda. On China, which has been a major focus of the U.S. foreign policy community, but definitely of Trump and his foreign policy cohort on China. Project 2025 demands essentially that countries choose between China or the United States, which I think will push many countries to make choices that the United States will not like. In my experience, having had the opportunity to travel a bit. I mean, countries don't want to have to make that choice. They want to be able to work with the United States and with China. And that includes very close allies. And further, what Project 2025 calls for the United States to withdraw from multilateral bodies, such as the UN Human Rights Council and other bodies that would essentially surrender the field to China and to other adversaries to expand and exert influence. And the last point I would add is that anti-China hawkishness will feed xenophobia here at home. We've had this experience over the past 20 plus years of the global war on terror, which is unfortunately is still ongoing. But as we saw in the kind of post 9/11 era, I think focusing America's foreign policy on an enemy has real serious impacts on our communities here in the United States. On Iran and the Middle East, Project 2025 advocates a markedly more confrontational stance, downgrading diplomacy. In particular, the Iran nuclear agreement, which Trump, of course, withdrew from. I think a wildly unwise decision, which has resulted in Iran drawing closer to a possible nuclear weapon than it ever has. But what Project 2025 proposes is a foreign policy of barely veiled advocacy for regime change in Iran and elsewhere. It outlines a new security architecture in the Middle East that builds on the Abraham Accords, but undermines efforts by making no mention of the Palestinians and promising to defund the Palestinian Authority, which would sabotage any hopes for a Palestinian state, which I think most experts on the Middle East understand is a really important part of building a durable security architecture for the region, one that recognizes human rights and security for all people, including Israelis in the region. As the past year has tragically demonstrated, the continued neglect of the root causes of this conflict will only benefit America's adversaries and aid recruitment by extremist forces. On nuclear weapons, the Project 2025 has a real commitment to expanding the U.S. nuclear weapons arsenal and abandoning arms control diplomacy, which is aimed at nonproliferation, which I think would effectively incentivize North Korea, Iran, and other adversaries to develop or expand their own nuclear weapons programs to develop their own deterrence. Wrapping up here, Project 2025 on a very important issue. Project 2025 calls for a whole of government, quote, whole of government unwinding of climate policy that would cause enormous harm to U.S. national security. I think there has been a growing consensus that climate change represents a very core national security challenge for the United States, not just here, as we've seen over the past weeks of severe storms, floods, but it's also a contributor to other national security challenges. It makes other national security challenges worse by forcing migration and some of the tensions that creates, just to name one. But the proposals in Project 2025 not only call for a repeat of President Trump's withdrawal from the Paris climate agreement, it goes one step further and calls for the United States to pull out of the parent treaty to the Paris Agreement, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which would make the United States the only government to take the country completely out of the global rules and standards setting climate action. It also calls for the United States to withdraw all support for international climate finance, which would kneecap vital climate finance institutions like the World Bank. And these recommendations amount to an abdication, a complete abdication of global climate leadership during a critical decade for global action if we're going to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise to avoid the worst aspects of climate change. So these are just a few of the issues we have to deal with. There are many more, but I think these are really some of the core proposals I think it's worth focusing on in the document. And once again, thank you for inviting me to speak here tonight.
Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate that. It is now my distinct honor to introduce our final panelist, Professor Jason Stanley. Jason Stanley is the Jacob Urowsky Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and the best-selling author of 6 books, including How Fascism Works, How Propaganda Works, and the recently released Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. He writes frequently about authoritarianism, democracy, propaganda, and free speech for the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and many other outlets. Professor Stanley, please illuminate us.
Look, first of all, thank you, Sandra, for organizing this. It's an emergency time. We all have to be all hands on deck, and you've just been great in putting all of this together. Fantastic. You know, Anne and Alex, all the group you've put together has laid out Project 2025. And I was going to go through, I've been focusing on education, so I was going to go through the sort of zany, wild education proposals, eliminating, transforming all money for disabled students into block grants for states to do whatever they want with, eliminating Head Start, eliminating Title I funding. So you know, thousands and thousands of teachers in low-income areas will be fired. Just the total and utter federal voucher program, total and utter destruction of the public school system, which is so foundational to democracy. Remember that Black Americans and the Freedmen Bureau created public schools in the South because democracy requires a generally literate public school population that has a common sense of the past of their country. This will utterly destroy all of that. It'll make, you know, if you think students are underperforming now, just wait. So I was going to go into the details of the education component, but there's really no need at this point. I think you all see how extreme the program will be. And I think I need to step back and explain the sort of a bit of the structure. And what I see is perhaps the main worry of all of this, and let's call it, frankly, just madness, right? This is a visionary program to deconstruct the United States on the wild fantasy that crony capitalism and churches will, you know, will replace it. So, you know, and a one-party state. In the literature, you know, there's various kinds of authoritarianism. There's the kind of, you know, on the perhaps most benign side, there'd be a Kagame of Rwanda who sort of, you know, rules forever and imprisons his political opponents, but is very smart and efficient. This is not that kind of authoritarianism. This is, and you can see that from Project 2025. It's a bunch of very disparate groups. And what Trump is saying is, I'll get all of your agendas done if you support me. And so this is the kind of grouping that elects a fascist leader. You know, Trump doesn't care about transgender Americans, but he will sacrifice anyone to stay in power. I forgot who said this, but it's absolutely right. You know, he wants to, he doesn't want to go to prison. We're seeing this also in Israel with Netanyahu. So when you have all of these diverse interest groups, Christian nationalists, libertarian billionaires, all seeking, to get in on, ride the Trump train to get their agendas done. It's not going to, and Vladimir Putin, it's not going to be a very coherent mix. And here you see a longstanding critique of fascism, that fascist governments are incompetent. And this is going to be anarchy. It's going to be a super cruel kind of anarchy. I mean, I think it's absolutely right that this will be, the mass deportation he threatens will remake the face of America, and it will make, the Japanese internment look, calm by comparison, but it will all be completely chaotic. It will, and if you think a wealthy country cannot just completely collapse, look at Venezuela. Also went for a charismatic leader, a leftist, not a far right. But, this is, it's not just our country collapsing into fascism. I think if you think about what's been said tonight, it's just the unraveling. They're betting they'll be able to keep some kind of stability, but at best, it'll be it'll be a stability enforced by cowboy policemen. Trump wants to have a nationwide stop and frisk. People will say, okay, this isn't xenophobic, this isn't racist, because Trump has some black male supporters, and some Latino supporters. The focus groups, people don't understand what he means by mass deportation. He doesn't mean, I think what's happening is people are, Latinos are like, well, yeah, the people who came in the last 2 years over the Mexican border, he's going to deport them. No. He's going to deport everybody's cousin who filled their paperwork out wrong. He's going to deport as many people as he can. If he's going to deport 11 million people, that's a lot of people. Or sometimes he says 20 million, I believe. So he's really going to go into it, and it's going to that will reshape the face of the nation. Having that kind of militarized presence next door everywhere, it will completely change our culture. Already we're seeing schools, there'll be a federal ban on teaching divisive concepts like supposedly divisive concepts like structural racism. So can you even teach in universities that Black Americans were denied mortgages? Most Black Americans, the vast majority, were denied housing mortgages because that's structural racism. Are those facts legal to teach? Is Black history legal to teach? Because so much of Black history is the history of institutions and structures. They're trying to erase the teaching of institutions and structures because they don't want you to understand what's going on. But something that is not commented on is the culture of fear among teachers that has arrived in all the states that have implemented these policies. They have made it horrific, to be very difficult to be a public school teacher. And I'm not just talking about Oklahoma, where they say they're going to buy 55,000 Bibles that look alike. This is like the hilarious crony part of the corruption. Oklahoma said every teacher has to have a Bible in their class, and every teacher has to teach out of it, including, it's also unbelievable. And then everyone's like, that'll never happen. And then it just happens. That's like, a disaster is not real unless it's on I don't know if you remember I live in New Haven, Connecticut. And when New Rochelle was hit by COVID, I was like, those poor people in New Rochelle, it'll never come here, but think about them. That's what's going on. To give an example of the kind of just vicious meanness of transforming the whole culture, what they're trying to train people to do is turn each other in for not being patriotic enough. So there's an online reporting form in Tennessee for reporting your professor to the government for teaching structural racism, intersectionality, teaching about transgender identity, and teaching Judith Butler. But the meanness goes. I mean, Project 2025 wants to make educators and place educators and public librarians who disseminate books and other material that address transgender issues. They want to register them as sex offenders. So there's a kind of just brutal meanness that's going on. And I think everyone who supports this fascist leader, because that's to say we have a cult of the leader, thinks they're going to get their agenda done. Like some people are like, okay, he'll if you're say a Black American man, you might think, okay, he's going to do some empowerment for Black businesses, which I don't think will happen. But suppose you think that, yeah, what about a nationwide stop and frisk? That's you, that's your kids. I have 2 Black sons. So I don't want them to experience what people went through in the 90s. So I've seen stop and frisks there. So I think Black men in America mostly know they don't want a nationwide stop and frisk, but the media is completely failing us because the media is not explaining what mass deportation means, and it means for the broader culture. We've been talking about it here, but the media largely, not like ProPublica. There's a lot of obvious media outlets that are doing heroic jobs, but the level, like for instance, the report that top general of Trump called him a fascist was not. I think people are tired. A lot of the media is like tired, and they just, and they're also doing anticipatory obedience because they're right. Trump might win, and then so we're seeing that particular thing in a lot of our institutions. But I think the general moral for today is all of this bet that America can go on as a kind of crony. People think, oh, crony capitalism will help, help my business because I'll be tight with the Trump train. No, a person higher up, more connected to the MAGA top will be able to take your business. They'll be able to use the courts to take your business because they love Viktor Orban, and that's what's going on in Hungary. Like Viktor Orban's friends get everything. And you think the culture of political, they're going to want to use the courts. Trump is telling us they're going to want to use the courts to go after political opponents. Well, we know what that looks like. I mean, I'd like to not be, Trump obviously is close with Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin throws, Vladimir Putin throws, journalists in Russia get thrown out of windows. Opposition politicians get essentially starved to death or worked to death. Russia is just an absolute mess. Vladimir Putin does random wars to go along with his crazy ideologies, and hundreds of thousands of people die. It's a personalist structure. It's not good for business. It's not good for ordinary people. It's just anarchy. And even if you can hold it together somehow, I mean, it's a bet on this wild libertarian Christian nationalist view that you can function as a country nowadays, without any competent government, without any just businesses, trickle down money, insurance companies, everybody, since everyone comes in this political structure, everyone with an extreme agenda thinks they can get it done by this leader who just wants to stay in office. So Netanyahu is doing this, right? Netanyahu, same situation. He legitimated the Israel's extreme right. Like the people that killed Rabin. Because he'll take any supporters, no matter how extreme, to keep him in office. And that's what Trump is doing. Trump himself doesn't care about the transgender Americans. I mean, he accepted a transgender woman into the Miss America contest. It's all transactional for him. But except I think and like Hitler, anti-Semitism was not transactional. Like that was core to Hitler's being. I think the xenophobia is core to Trump's being. I don't think he's playing there. I think he's as extreme about that as Hitler is about Jews. That seems to be very central to him. And so I agree that, that's what he's going to get out of it. And of course, it's just going to be crony capitalism for his businesses, more money for Jared Kushner. It's going to be a kind of selling of the federal government, entirely a personalist crony capitalist system with these different extremists all getting what they want in exchange for supporting him. But it's not going to be a stable country. It's going to be a country with mass imprisonment where it's very frightening to be politically engaged. I don't think Trump is going to be Putin. I don't think he's as organized as Putin. I don't think he's as competent, and he's going to be governing all these people who are only there because of their loyalty to him. So I think there's going to be a serious competence problem. I mean, there obviously is that in Russia as well. But I think it'll be sort of dramatically, but I also agree that foreign policy will just be done on his whims. Like Putin decided to do a full-scale invasion of Ukraine and so a Russian soldier was interviewed and said, that's what Russians do. Our leaders send us into war. We charge and we die. That's like, I think Trump's particular personalist fascist rule will look differently, but it will be like, the trade will be like when he is a crazy whim or indulges something, obviously the corruption will be rampant, but when he wants to indulge something, they'll be like, okay, we did this for you. That's the deal. And I think he's very serious about, doing actions that will not just change the fabric of our country, the culture, the suspicion, the fear that will increase radically. But I think that he's just gonna. I think there's a good bet that all of this will just take the country into a very. I mean, look at what the UK did with Brexit. That was like.
Jason, go ahead and wrap up with that, okay?
Yeah. So it is possible for countries to vote themselves into destruction. Don't think that isn't possible. And I worry, I think the previous speakers have shown that that's a significant worry in this case.
Thank you, Jason. Well, this has been an exceptional opportunity to hear our expert panelists share their insights, and we look forward to elucidating additional information through our questions. Let's move to part 2, Q&A. I have asked my National Affairs Committee colleagues, Kajua Lee and Andy Scalise, to monitor the Q&A box throughout the program, sorting through and selecting some of your questions to ask the speakers. They will also ask some questions prepared by the committee. There clearly won't be time to ask every question. They will try to identify those that are on topic, not duplicates, and that address aspects of the issue not yet considered. Kajua and Andy, I may break in from time to time and let you know when to ask the last question, or even just to cold stop. Kajua will conduct the first and Andy the second half of the Q&A. Please begin the Q&A, Kajua.
All right, so the first question we have is for Dean Baker. This is touching back on your mention of labor rights. So Project 2025 proposes to significantly dismantle the Department of Labor, reducing its enforcement capacity on wage laws. workplace safety standards, and labor rights. It also supports policies that limit the power of unions and weaken collective bargaining rights, which you also mentioned. And then there's calls for eliminating the federal minimum wage to allow the market to dictate wages. So, will these plans increase wage theft, wage reduction, unsafe working conditions, job insecurity, worker exploitation, undermining wage negotiations, worsen income inequality, and financial insecurity for workers? And what are the broader implications for the American labor market and society, especially as the cost of living increases?
Yeah, basically, this takes away the cop on the beat. And, one of the things that I, sort of troubled by, sometimes people talk about labor as a special category as opposed to other contracts. So if I sign a contract with someone that they're going to buy my house and they don't buy it, well, I could sue them and this and that. That's what it's supposed to be with labor. So it's not that we're asking for any special privilege when we say, workers who work should expect to be paid, so so basically what we're saying is, or what they're saying in Project 2025, that none of the laws apply to workers. We could do whatever we want to you. We can put it on safe workplace. We could promise to pay you and not pay you. We cannot pay overtime. We can do whatever the hell we want. So yes, this is going to make much more unequal distribution of income. I'll just add one other thing on this, a related issue that people have touched on. I'm an economist, obviously. We get data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, other government agencies. We should really prize them because we've heard them say, oh, they just make those up. No, they don't. If you want to find out about where the unemployment rate came from, you could go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, find in as much detail as you want how they got those numbers. The survey that literally, you could see the survey, you could read it. I mean, no one's going to do that, but you have that option, and economists do that. They're going to get rid of that because they don't value that. They don't. So when we get an unemployment number from them, we get a wage number, it'll be whatever they feel like, because why not? So yes, it will be a really bad story.
Thank you for that. And we're moving on to a second question. This question is also from the National Affairs Committee. So this focuses on our foreign supply chain. So Project 2025 emphasizes reducing reliance on foreign supply chains, but offers few concrete strategies for building resilient domestic alternatives. Without investments in infrastructure and workforce training, how could this lead to economic dislocation and higher prices for consumers, particularly for middle and working class Americans who would face higher costs of goods and job losses in sectors dependent on global supply chains?
Well, it's been striking. I mean, the Biden-Harris administration has been very effective in trying to be rational and trying to make our supply chains more secure, which doesn't mean we produce everything domestically. I mean, because we just saw we had a hurricane. So I'm trying to remember what was intravenous fluid that disproportionately came from areas affected by the hurricane. So being domestic doesn't necessarily secure it. But what you want to make sure is you have diverse channels. And obviously there are some very serious national security issues. So having, semiconductors, advanced semiconductors all come from Taiwan. Hopefully you don't have a conflict with China, but it's a possibility. So that's kind of foolish. So they've been very careful in trying to think through, how do you make supply chains more secure? What are the infrastructure investments you need? And really made incredible progress. They don't get anywhere near the praise they deserve for that. It's really been remarkable in the first administration, really in my lifetime. I guess go back to Eisenhower and the Johnson administrations, but that's a long, long time ago. And I'll just put it this way. There's no evidence it's on their radar screen that you want to be thinking about how you have secure supply chains. And just saying, taking a Trumpian line more than a 225 line, oh, we're going to produce it all here. That's close to crazy. And you're going to have enormous disruptions in a process. I mean, maybe we can envision somewhere 10, 15, 20 years down the road where we have autarky. I think that'd be bad, but you could envision getting there. We can't do that in 2 or 3 or 4 years.
And thank you for that.
Kajua, I know we're out of our plan, but it looks like one of our other speakers, Jason, has a question for Dean. So let's let Jason go ahead and ask it.
Okay.
Yeah, Dean, it seems to me you're describing like unplanned anarchy. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's, Trump, as I said, he was just at a forum and he said, 50% tariffs, maybe we need 500% tariffs, so is he going to do that? Well, you sort of hope, well, this is really crazy, but who's going to stop him if he, and again, we've all emphasized this, he's surrounding himself with yes people. So in his first administration, I don't think any of us would look to people like Jeff Sessions as a paragon, but there were things he wouldn't do. But
Right.
he's going to have people who will do whatever he asks. Let me just add one more thing that I think we're all familiar with, but it's worth emphasizing. Many of us think that there's going to be safe grounds. Don't bet on that. They know about our safe grounds. So the universities, I'm trying to remember, it wasn't Comer, but it doesn't matter. One of the Republican leaders in Congress was saying, if university, so taking away student loans from universities that don't follow their guidelines, what they think they should be doing on protesters. So if they're
you're going to be using Title VI to go
yeah.
after
Yeah,
universities.
so do you think, you might have, administrators at universities who respect the right of their students or faculty to protest? But they're gonna say, you won't get student loans. What are they gonna do? They're gonna
not just student loans. They're gonna go after universities for persecution of Christians, for discriminating against Christians, discriminating against conservatives, discriminating against white people. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And would it be easier to fire a professor for teaching a class on colonialism, about indigenous Americans, or put him on leave for a while, years? It's going to destroy. There are no liberal arts colleges in authoritarian countries.
Also, the idea of blue states. I'm in Oregon, so I could think, well, we're safely blue state. In Virginia, hopefully we'll be a blue state. But and Trump has said this, he'll withhold federal funds. He's very open on that. He said California, if Newsom doesn't do what he wants, and who the hell knows what he wants, but he has some idea on water policy, if he doesn't do what he wants, he won't give him disaster relief next time they have fires, which they will have.
Okay, I'm going to jump in because I want to get it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, this has been very interesting. So go ahead, let's ask Alex a question.
So for Alex, we have a question from Dr. Forrest Shirley Thompson. This goes back to the mention of Medicare Advantage. Dr. Thompson asks, what is the draw to these Advantage policies if they are limiting services?
What's the draw to them? So why do people choose them? Is that the question? So the trick, the best trick that the insurance companies pulled is to have it called Medicare Advantage. If it was called United Health Group, people would be like, oh, I hate them. They denied me care during my working life. But that's not how it's presented. It's presented as pick the plan that works best for you, and it's all Medicare. So the vast majority of people do not know that Medicare Advantage is just corporate insurers. The vast majority of people do not know that what that means is there are limited networks, that if you're outside of the network, you don't get the care that you need, or you pay for it out of your own pocket. The vast majority of people don't know that what it means is an insurance company can delay and deny your care in privatized Medicare. That's what the report I was talking about showed. Astronomical rates of delays and denials. And I just want to say again, these are deadly delays and denials. That's the purpose of delaying and denying care. So the reason that people choose them is, I will not go into too many of the details. You have the fact that it's called Medicare Advantage. But during the last Trump administration, what they do is they did what they're planning on doing. They goosed the system to just put jet fuel into the privatization and really glide path people into privatized Medicare. The Biden-Harris administration has done remarkably well at trying to restrain that. And you can look at, I always say, don't judge a politician by what they say, because they say a lot of things. But you can definitely judge a politician by what they did and what they do. When Biden-Harris came into office, what they did is they took on pharmaceutical corporations and they gave Medicare the ability to negotiate drug prices. And the American people win in that case. When Trump came into office, what he did, he put the guy who was 1/3 of the insulin cartel that charged prices so high that people die from them. He put him in charge of HHS. That's what he does. So I think the question is a really important one, but the answer is that there is no choice for millions of Americans. So it's not that they're choosing, it's that the system is structured in a way to push them into privatized Medicare. And what Trump's Project 2025 does is just finishes that totality so that everybody is pushed into privatized Medicare. Traditional Medicare is eliminated. The corporate insurers can make money the way that they do, which is by delaying and denying health care.
Kajua, it looks like Anne is back. Why don't you ask her one question and then we'll move out, end your section and get to Andy.
Okay, perfect. So this question comes from the National Affairs Committee. So Project 2025 proposes prioritizing faith-based organizations, including local churches, for federal grants to provide social services like job training, mentorship, and community support. By promoting faith-based organizations to take over many social services, doesn't Project 2025 enable these organizations to impose religious requirements on those seeking help and to deny access to those who do not align with the religious views of these organizations, as well as undermine secular programs that could provide more inclusive and scientifically grounded approaches?
You're on mute,
Oh.
Anne. There. Oops.
The answer is yes. But I don't think it will be, well, I'm speculating, of course. I don't think it would be uniform. So, for example, you've already had cases where adoption agencies have been outsourced to faith-based Christian organizations who then deny the right of adoption to Jewish couples, right? You also have very, very troubling issues around denial of service. So there was this celebrated case that went before the Supreme Court involving the wedding cake, where it was actually one of these relatively fabricated cases, which the Alliance Defending Freedom specializes in. But if you look at the idea that religious freedom allows a cake baker not to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, what happens when you extend that to a physician whose faith means that he doesn't believe in trans people? You know, just as can you get to the withholding of services and treatment based on faith in terms of people who are then working for public and quasi-public institutions? That is the direction they're undeniably going, and they've already made considerable headway in their laboratory states, which I would describe as, well, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas to start with, but there are others as well. So yes, and by the way, there are also a lot of attempts to organize these so-called Christian organizations to capture sections of the market. And we don't know where this is going to go. There's a whole world of fundamentalist Christian health insurance, which is based on a different model and apparently involves some very questionable practices. And these are promoted at the various gatherings of fundamental Christians. So how quickly that enters the public sphere is largely going to be a question for states, where it will be troubling. But with the second Trump administration, I would expect it to enter the national sphere, which would be more troubling.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you, Kajua, for your questions. And let's move over now to Andy for the second set of questions.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, panelists. Our first question is for Matt. So Matt, there was the project for the New American Century, a planning initiative in the late 1990s, far-right neoconservative strategic plan supported by far-right extremists like William Kristol, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, called for regime change operations led by the U.S. kind of across the world. To what extent are similar operations planned for in Project 2025, and what targets might there be for a regime change in other kind of international interventions?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know that we have an exactly similar effort under a Trump administration. As I see it, in the Trump administration, you're going to have a competition between a few camps of foreign policy, a few foreign policy camps. One is what I would call the primacists, who kind of share the ideals of the Project for a New American Century, which is that America has both the right and the ability to kind of exert its power unbound globally, for the benefit of all humanity. And essentially, it's a belief that American military power is magic, and can do anything. This was kind of the idea that drove the Iraq War and the global war on terror. But I also think it's important that there's another tendency inside the Trump conservative and Republican camp today, which some people have defined as the kind of prioritizers. They see China as the overriding threat, and they think that America's entanglements in regions like the Middle East and Europe, particularly they're opposed to U.S. support for Ukraine against Russia and in Russia's war on Ukraine. And they think the United States is essentially wasting time in the Middle East because they see China as the existential threat, the kind of key competitor of the United States for dominance of the global order, and they think that is where we should be directing all of our resources. So I don't necessarily, certainly there are some people who were involved in the Project for a New American Century who are still present in the Republican foreign policy establishment. Some of them have migrated, sad to say, over to the Democratic camp. But for now, I think it's kind of, we're going to see a competition between the two kind of categories that I just noted. But again, those two camps can, there's a lot of mischief that can be made, a lot of disasters that could come from what I just said, because there is still a tendency, not just in the Republican Party, but unfortunately in Washington generally, that America has the right and the ability to kind of reach in and transform areas of the world by dint of our enormous military power. At the same time, the prioritizers that I noted, this is tends to align with Trump's views himself. He's someone who clearly is very concerned with China. He kind of put U.S. foreign policy on the path to strategic competition with China. And I think that could lead to its own set of conflicts, not just in the region, but also I think that focus on China could have real impacts domestically in terms of xenophobia and hostility toward Chinese Americans and toward Asian Americans.
Thank you, Matt. One more question for you, and somewhat still on the topic of military, but Project 2025 calls for the use of military forces in defense support of civil authorities, DSCI operations. That's usually for domestic emergencies, other law enforcement support, and other domestic activities. These can often be necessary, as we're seeing right now in the Southeast and for disaster relief and emergencies. But what risks under kind of a Project 2025 regime do you see in kind of expanding military involvement domestically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because as a number of us have said in this talk, I mean, the kind of overarching theme of Project 2025 is removing the checks on presidential power and giving the president the tools to exert his power without bounds, essentially. And here there is unfortunately a tool that exists in the Constitution, the Insurrection Act, which enables the president to invoke this power and use it with fairly little limit. If the president determines that the national security and keeping order requires using the U.S. military domestically, I think clearly President, what Trump has said just in the past few days, using the National Guard, using the U.S. military against the enemy within, I think strongly suggests that he will do this.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Matt. I have a couple of questions here for Jason, although we have a list, we have a ton of foreign policy stuff we could talk about, but it is already 8:40. So Jason, you mentioned a couple of other states that are kind of having some of these things, like being able to fire professors and stalking. we joke around here about Florida and Texas, and particularly recently Florida. I mean, it seems to have become America's kind of pilot fascist project. What do you see there that they're looking to test and expand around the country?
Well, they're going to do they want let's see, I have it on one of my endless notes here. They obviously are going to put the censorship regime nationwide. They're going to create this atmosphere of fear that we already see. Florida, the AAUP special report on Florida says that it's an atmosphere of intimidation and fear. I can't remember the exact quotes, but it's something like it's an atmosphere of intimidation and fear that is unprecedented in U.S. history. I think we're going to see something that makes the McCarthy era, the Red Scare, look tame in universities. We're seeing that kind, and that's part of any kind of inquiry into the myths of American greatness will be, you'll put yourself at risk of losing your job, or, obviously they're already saying that if you teach about gender studies, which has been banned in Hungary, you can be put on the sex offender registry list. So I see that moving to the federal level. So as we just discussed, we have denying federal funds on the basis of people teaching divisive concepts like supposedly divisive concepts like intersectionality. So yeah, we're just going to see the destruction of the world's greatest university system, because people all over the world send their kids to universities in the United States, and I think that will stop.
Andy,
Thank you.
one more question for Jason, and then we're going to move on.
So I'm going to take a point of privilege and ask a question I saw from one of our audience members, because I think it's a good one to kind of close on, and I think it's something that hopefully you have an answer to, Jason, but it might be the hardest one. If we go into this fascist kind of state as we kind of discussed for the last hour and a half, how do we get out of it? How long does it take? And where do we go?
Yeah, I mean, the Jim Crow South lasted a very long time. I don't think it's going to be quite like that, because that was sort of an organized white supremacist. But this is look at many southern states. When I tell people in Europe the percentage of Black Americans that there are in states like Alabama and Mississippi, they're like, between 30 and 40%. They're shocked. They don't understand why Black Americans have so little power in those states. So look at those states and see, have they ever been democracies? So the civil rights movement occurred in those states, and some, Jim Crow states, and somehow it succeeded partly. You'll need that kind of mass bravery, but Americans have done it before. So we've had a labor movement, we've had a civil rights movement, we'd have a women's equality movement. So we have to do all of that again. And so 10 years is silly, I think, is an estimate. I mean,
let me be a little more pessimistic. We are dealing with boneheads. I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, they hate expertise. So if you know what you're talking about, you're an object of suspicion. And I raise that in the context of Aaron. Matt could speak in more expertise on this than me, but we're likely to get in a war, because they're, Putin or someone's going to sometime insult Donald Trump. And so I worry that's how it might end, and that would likely be a really, really bad story.
Yeah, look at how Russia got into the full-scale invasion. Putin's yes men were telling him they'd be in Kyiv in 3 days. He had no one. Putin thought that Ukrainians were going to greet Russian troops as liberators, because that was his fantasy, and everyone told him that would happen. So that will happen here.
Okay, this has been illuminating. And as I promised at the start of our forum, it is now my honor to welcome our special guest, Congressman Bobby Scott, who I see it looks like he's in there. Good. He is the dean of our Virginia congressional delegation. Congressman Scott represents Virginia's 3rd congressional district and currently serves as the ranking member or top Democrat on the Education and Workforce Committee. He previously served as chairman of the committee when Democrats were in the majority, where he worked with President Biden to draft the education provisions of the American Rescue Plan, which provided the single largest federal investment in public K through 12 education in American history. And he was critical in securing language in the rescue plan to save the private pensions of 1 million retirees. We hope to make him chairman of that critical committee again in 19 days when we take back the House, reelect Tim Kaine, and elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Congressman Scott, thank you for taking time this evening to join us to offer some of your comments.
Well, Sandra, thank you so much. And thank you for reminding Democrats just how dangerous the Donald Trump administration will be. They've outlined it in Project 2025. They weren't quite ready last time, but Project 2025 shows that they'll be ready this time. The plan is very simple. First, to bestow on the president dictatorial powers, and then using that power to impose a far-right, right-wing agenda. Now, I say dictatorial, that requires the Supreme Court to help, but they're already on board. They have given him immunity, which something that wouldn't make any sense unless what we're talking about would otherwise have been a crime. He can commit crimes now and get immunity. And very little talked about the Chevron doctrine, where agencies were given deference when they make rules, their expertise, given deference to their expertise. Now the courts will make the decision as to whether or not a regulation is appropriate. And that's important because Donald Trump will control the courts if he's elected. He's got 6 right-wing conservatives on the court now. 2 of them are in their 70s. 3 of them are under 60. If you figure people are going to leave the court around 80, that means if Thomas and Alito retire, he can replace them with people in their 40s or 50s. He would have the court locked up for at least the next 20 years. That's 5 presidential elections. And if we lose one of the next 5, they could reset the clock in perpetuity. That is a dangerous situation, and they will give him immunity, allow him to be the dictator. And the second item on that is to sabotage civil service protections so that people who didn't do what he said because it was either illegal or totally improper can be fired on the spot, no protections, puts his little flunky in there, and he can impose his agenda. And that agenda, we've already heard many of the items on the agenda. You mentioned me as head of the lead Democrat on education, abolish the Department of Education, abolish Head Start, abolish Title I funding for low-income schools, cut back on school lunches, cut back on student loan payment programs, and no DEI, no diversity, equity, and inclusion, which would give faith-based organizations more latitude than they have now to just discriminate. But essentially, it would be impossible to figure out how, if you don't have any DEI going on, how you could civil rights protections against discrimination. Healthcare, they keep saying he has this concept. Well, he had a plan. The plan he had was scored by the Congressional Budget Office. If his plan, the one that John McCain stuck his thumbs down in the middle of the night, cost to go up 20% the first year, 20-some million fewer people would have insurance. If you have a pre-existing condition, you lose your protections. And since it didn't have minimum benefits, what you already have is probably better than what you would end up getting. Thankfully, John McCain killed that plan, so we don't have to put up with that. There's a lot of, we've heard about the police on the beat. A lot of that, you can take the police off the beat and protection of consumers, and just by cutting back on funding. If they don't have the funds to to enforce, then the corporations get away with it. And if you get, and finally, if you get in his way, he'll weaponize the Department of Justice to come after you. And the media people who have been critical of him ought to be scared to death of that. That's just coming, and that's why hundreds of Republicans oppose his election, including his own high-ranking officials who talk about how dangerous he would be. Maya Angelou said, if somebody says who they are, you ought to believe them. And Coach Walz says if a coach makes a game plan, he intends to use it. That's why we need to take this seriously, and why this session that Sandra, that you've brought us to, is so important to remind us what's in this plan and what they intend to do. So thank you so much. And we need to get out and make sure that Project 2025 just stays on paper and never gets to see the light of day.
Thank you so much, Congressman Scott, for joining us. We have just a couple minutes before I offer my closing remarks. I want to give every speaker here, if they'd like about 1 minute each to give a conclusion, I welcome it.
Well,
Alex?
I can jump in there just to echo what the congressman said. You know, we know what they want to do. We know what they want to bring us back to. Before Obamacare, the insurance companies they created a thing, prior existing condition, right? They just deny people care. We know what their plans are in healthcare. It's to allow the corporate insurers to not give us healthcare, to make money by denying us care. We know what their plans are for Social Security. Since 1935, they've been trying to destroy Social Security. We know who we're up against. It's the billionaires, and they hate things that work because they can't make money off of them. Social Security works, so they want to destroy it. Public education works, so they want to destroy it. Traditional Medicare works, so they want to destroy it. Allowing women to have control over their own healthcare works, so they want to rip that away. And it's all about control and power, and we don't have to guess what they want to do because they wrote it all down on a document that you can find online that we're talking about now. And I invite everyone to do that, to read it. Because what they are laying out is a terrifying vision for a different country. They would overturn the checks and balances in this country and put all of the authority in the president's office, in the executive. And that's what we face the choice, going forward or going backwards in November.
Thanks, Alex. Anyone else?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Well, we've got 18 days, I guess. And our hope is that enough of the electorate is paying attention and approaches everyone they know in terms of friends and family to explain the gravity of the situation to the fence sitters and the people who are confused and lost. If by some miracle things go a certain direction, it won't be over. And I would say we would need to focus on two priorities. One is dealing with Citizens United so that the vote and the contribution of a citizen counts in a way that large corporations cannot cancel out. And the second is reviving our national news media through whatever forms of support are necessary, including perhaps through public support, so that the electorate is dealing with a political life that is based on fact rather than disinformation, misinformation, wild rumor, and intentional falsehoods.
Thank you, Ann. Matt or Jason, do either one of you have a closing comment? Jason, unmute, please. Go ahead.
Not really. Everybody else has comment. I mean, I think more is just at stake than going into a sort of crazed Christian Handmaid's Tale kind of situation. I think, the fundamental stability of any system whatsoever is at stake.
Thank you. Matt?
No, I'll just again thank you for inviting me and very glad to speak here tonight.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And on behalf of the FCDC National Affairs Committee and our Virginia Democratic Committee co-sponsors, I want to thank all of our distinguished panelists for your in-depth analyses. And I also want to thank our audience for your interest, your attention, and activism, and for sticking with us. We know our forums are in depth, and we love that you stay with us throughout. As we close this forum, we're faced with a stark choice. On one side stands Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's Project 2025, a dangerous agenda that seeks to strip away fundamental rights, tighten government control over education, suppress dissent, and concentrate wealth and power in the hands of the few. This plan envisions an America where corporate interests dominate, voting rights are restricted, and basic freedoms are sacrificed in the name of power. It is a vision of fear and regression, threatening to unravel the very fabric of our democracy. In contrast, Vice President Kamala Harris and Tim Walz offer a new way forward, built on the promise of opportunity, unity, and progress for all. Their agenda prioritizes the middle class, protects fundamental rights like reproductive freedom, and ensures that every American has access to affordable healthcare, quality education, and the chance to thrive. They are committed to fighting for a fair opportunity economy where small businesses can grow, costs are lowered for families, and every vote and every voice is heard. Their vision is one of hope, where America leads with innovation and compassion, lifting up every community and protecting the rights and freedoms we hold dear. The stakes in this election couldn't be higher. Will we choose to move forward together, building a stronger and more just America for all? Or will we allow fear and authoritarianism to take root? The future of our country is in our hands, and with our votes, we can ensure that it is a future of dignity, opportunity, and freedom for every American. This completes our forum, and thank you for joining us.